At number 71 on the Iconic 100 is the 1914 Cracker Jack Ty Cobb card. And here to discuss this card with us today is David Ratliff from Signed and Slab. David, I'm nervous. What do you think about this ranking, number 71 for this card?
That is abysmally too low. This is a card that everyone recognizes. Any serious vintage baseball collector has this card very, very high on their list because it, quite frankly, is very low pop when you slabbed when you consider what it is. And listen, you've got Cracker Jack, you've got baseball. I mean, Adam, we still sing about this every seventh inning stretch at every game across this country now 108 years later.
Yep.
Are you kidding me? Like, no, that whoever was voting on this, either they can own one or like, because this isn't a value issue. These cards are incredibly valuable in any sort of condition. Yeah, I'm disappointed with that.
Yeah, I am.
I had it much higher.
Yeah, so your list has this at number 19.
Yeah.
And so the thing that I think is clear here is it's one of the most recognizable baseball cards of all time. Ty Cobb has a number of recognizable baseball cards though, and this is one of the things that I think comes out of this list is how out of this ranked list is how people compare things like basketball, modern basketball cards, or modern football cards, or modern or whatever to each other. And having said that, though, if you were to poll a group of really well-read guys that know vintage baseball, this is one of the cards. I mean, you mentioned Cracker Jacks. Cracker Jacks and baseball cards are synonymous with each other. And this is, either the greatest or the second greatest. I mean, tell me if you disagree, but I think it's one of the two greatest, most iconic Cracker Jack cards in existence. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. Cobb and Joe Jackson are the two that are, when on a short list, I think those are the two that pretty much every collector wants to have.
So give me your sales pitch. If you're giving this, if you're teaching somebody who's new about this card, talk for a second about why, other than just rarity and maybe recognizability, talk about why this card is great.
So a couple reasons right off the bat. So most people I think don't know there were actually 2 years of Cracker Jack produced, 1914 and 1915. And for the majority of the set, the images in each are the same. But what's interesting about the 1915 set is you could send in to the company at that point to acquire the full set. Whereas in 1914, all the cards that were produced were put into the Cracker Jack box. And so, which is also a very interesting, if you're at the National or anywhere trying to find an old Cracker Jack actual box of them that these things would have come in, it is an incredibly difficult search. But back to the card, all of the 1914s should essentially come with caramel stains on them because they weren't like your stickers now in the little thing that you opened up. No, the cards were just in there. So they all have a little bit of damage to them, which really prevents the high-end grades. But when you look at that image, you know exactly who it is. I think the red and the consistency of the use in the set is just incredibly striking. And it is a really good checklist, a ton of Hall of Famers in it. But with Cobb and Jackson leading the way, I can tell you, if you run around any card show and you see someone have that card out, there's generally a mob at their table just to look at it. And it sets off that nostalgic part of Cracker Jack and baseball. Like they're so interwoven now, and so that becomes the set. And so collecting those iconic players in what really is an iconic card Like, I mean, it ticks a lot of boxes, I think, in terms of high level and just high nostalgia collecting.
Yeah,
So
fantastic. I think, as you look at the profile of the 150 people who took this list, we've got a lot of vintage collectors, but we have a lot of collectors of all kinds. We
yeah,
tried to ask people like you who have a really well-rounded understanding of the whole of the hobby. I think the thing that's hard is there's not a ton of people who know the whole hobby, right? Who know
right, right.
about every element. But the thing that's clear to me as I look at the list as it stands now, as we're counting it down here, is you've got these cards that are at the top of the list that are just well renowned. You know what cards they're going to be. You might not know their order, but there's certain cards that
Yeah,
are even in vintage baseball that everybody knows have to be at the top of the list. We know it. The cards that are secondary to that, though, especially the pre-war stuff, a
yeah,
lot of us who are maybe newer, who haven't had as much experience or newer to vintage baseball, don't have the same level of understanding about those secondary cards. And I use the word secondary cautiously because I get this is one of the most iconic cards of all time, but it's not the Wagner. It's a
right.
card that not everybody has just sort of come upon and gone, oh, it's iconic. But that's the purpose of this list, and that's the purpose of the content. A lot of the content we do is we want people to understand what is out there that is iconic that maybe people don't know as much about. So I think it's fantastic. You've got it in the top 20. I feel a little bit sheepish that it's as low as it is, but I believe that with time, a lot of these cards that are older that have been iconic for a long time, they're going to continue to see an uptick in collectors' views as collectors get more and more educated.
Yeah, I agree with that. And look, I should, grant it wasn't the highest Ty Cobb card on my list. In terms of iconic, certainly the T206 set is just, yeah, and he has 4 cards in that. The portraits and the bat off, particularly, are much more well known, and some of that's just a function of availability, right? 1914 Cracker Jacks are honestly not particularly available in the hobby. But as you mentioned, I think as people are able to spend the time and really start to do some of the research, particularly the 1914 Cracker Jacks, because the population count is so much lower than the 1915s. And then when you learn a little bit about a couple of the other guys in there that have essentially a photo variation from 14 to 15, it adds a lot of color and a lot of intrigue, I think, to that set. But Cracker Jacks in baseball, unless someone writes a new song, I think it's always going to be there. So, those cards to me are always going to be iconic because of that link.
Well said. Well, I appreciate your perspective on this, David. It's always just wonderful to have you. This has been number 71, the 1914 Cracker Jack Ty Cobb. Tomorrow we'll be back with another card. And until then, happy collecting.